Hey everyone, welcome to the show.
Imagine believing your civilization was, destined for eternal greatness, only for history to suddenly, dramatically just go into reverse. What if the very engine of your success actually contained the seeds of your downfall?
Wow, yeah. Today we're doing a deep dive into an absolutely fascinating work of nonfiction. It's a profound historical and economic analysis. Really challenges long-held beliefs about power, decline, and even migration. And hey, if you enjoy deep dives into books like this, make sure you like and subscribe. It really helps us keep bringing you these in-depth explorations and surprising insights.
Definitely. We're delving into Why Empires Fall by John Rapley and Peter Heather. And this deep dive, it isn't just a history of one empire, it's more like a dual narrative. It uses the rise and fall of the Roman Empire as a lens, sort of, to understand the current trajectory of the modern West. The book's central premise is pretty bold,
Hmm.
that empires, just by dominating and developing the world around them, they inadvertently create the conditions for their own relative decline. It suggests that, many of our current global challenges, economic shifts, migration patterns, even internal political divisions, they aren't really external threats. They're
Right.
direct consequences, often sort of inevitable consequences of this imperial life cycle.
Mhm.
It's genuinely thought-provoking, makes you rethink global history.
It really does. And you can find an Amazon link to Why Empires Fall
Hmm.
right in our description if you want to grab a copy for yourself. Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. What immediately struck me about Rapley and Heather's argument is how it just demolishes the conventional wisdom,
Hmm.
especially about Rome. I mean, for centuries, you've got figures like Edward Gibbon painting this picture of Rome's fall as, slow internal decay, moral rot, uncontrolled barbarian invasions.
Hmm. The standard story.
Exactly. But they present a startlingly different picture, don't they?
They really do. And what's fascinating here is their use of modern archaeological evidence, particularly what they call that unshakable accumulated tonnage of pottery shards.
Yeah, I loved that
Me
frame.
too. And they use it to show that the Roman Empire was actually experiencing an economic boom, a golden fourth century, they call it, right before its western half just crumbled. This completely flips that narrative of slow internal decline.
Huh?
They clarify that agri-deserti, these supposedly deserted fields, weren't fields of ruin at all. They were just, well, untaxable lands
Okay.
and the decline of stone inscriptions. Not an economic implosion, but just a shift in elite ambition towards imperial bureaucracy.
That's such a key point, and it makes you think about how entrenched those old ideas are, like how you still see contemporary commentators, even politicians like Steve Bannon or Donald Trump, citing Gibbon's view on border control and aliens to explain modern problems.
Right.
It just shows the power of a long-held, beautifully told story, even if it's, well, based on outdated historical understanding.
Exactly. And the book mentions their own conversation started over a decade ago. You have these two scholars from totally different fields, Roman history and political economy, realizing their empires, so to speak, were unraveling for similar, previously misunderstood reasons, systemic reasons.
Hmm. It highlights how easy it is to fall back on those,
Mm,
comfortable but maybe flawed explanations.
for sure.
So connecting this to the bigger picture then,
Sure.
the real core strength here is that imperial life cycle theory, right?
Absolutely.
It suggests an imperial core creates wealth in its periphery.
Uh-huh.
And this very development eventually builds up new political and economic power in the periphery,
Yeah.
which then inevitably perhaps leads to a challenge to the core's dominance.
That's the crux of it. And it reveals this powerful, almost cyclical pattern. The very act of spreading influence and developing others plants the seeds for future challenges. It's foundational, really, for understanding these global dynamics.
Man.
This perspective feels so compelling because it offers a much more nuanced, systemic explanation for what we're seeing today. China's rise, shifting trade patterns, it goes way beyond simple good versus bad narratives.
Okay, but I do have to challenge one aspect here.
Oh, go on.
While that overarching thesis about the imperial life cycle is, yeah, incredibly insightful, it did feel like sometimes the emphasis on inevitability might, well, it might underplay the role of human agency or specific policy choices that maybe could have altered the path.
Mm.
Like, take Rome's fiscal problems and internal divisions. Yes, clearly linked to external pressures, the book shows that.
Sure.
But weren't there also decisions by Roman leaders that perhaps made things worse, exacerbated the problems?
That's a really important question. Is it truly this inevitable natural evolution, like the book suggests early on? Or are there critical points where different choices could have led to fundamentally different outcomes? I mean, the book argues that what it called ill-informed attempts directly to reverse relative decline, and they cite things like MAGA America or Brexit Britain, that these risk only accelerating the process.
Right.
But doesn't that imply there could be well-informed attempts? So is the flaw really inherent in the imperial system cycle itself, or is it more in the specific, sometimes flawed responses of leaders within that system?
Exactly my thinking. For instance, that discussion on Rome dividing imperial power because of the Persian threat. Okay, necessary maybe, given slow communications back then.
Sure.
But the book states it materially affected the smooth operation of the system, leading to all those periodic civil wars. And they say more Roman soldiers died fighting each other in those wars than against, European barbarians.
Yeah, a stunning statistic.
So does that feel like an entirely earned consequence of the imperial structure itself? Or does it maybe highlight a point where different political management, maybe better collaboration between co-emperors, could have led to a less fragmented outcome? The book frames it as structural, but you can kind of imagine alternatives, right?
You can. And what about the fiscal contract? That's another big one.
Uh-huh.
The book points out that when Rome lost chunks of its tax base, its response was basically to raise tax rates on whoever was left.
Which sounds logical on the surface, but
It increased the potential attractions of shifting allegiance to one of the barbarian confederations. That feels like a very direct policy choice, doesn't it? One that actively contributed to the unraveling, even if it was driven by external pressure. The book is quite firm that the fall was complete for Rome, which implies that inevitability again. But these specifics, they sometimes hint at other paths, maybe paths not taken. Could different fiscal reforms, maybe recognizing new revenue sources earlier or distributing wealth differently, could that have made the collapse less, well, contrived, as they put it, less total?
it makes you wonder.
Yeah.
And it also brings up questions about the severity of internal division in the modern West, which they parallel with Rome. The book states, pretty powerfully, that the economic restructuring of the last 40 years has seen the formation of two political constituencies within most Western societies with profoundly different economic interests.
Which seems undeniable.
Right, it's powerfully argued. But does the book sufficiently explore whether this level of internal socioeconomic inequality, this political fragmentation, is it an unavoidable part of globalization? Or is it maybe a flaw in how Western societies have chosen to manage the consequences of globalization?
That's a good point. It does hint at policy solutions later on, like wealth redistribution.
Yeah.
But earlier, it often emphasizes the inevitability of these consequences. So which is it? Are we locked in, or are there levers we could pull differently?
Exactly.
And, one area where I felt the book could have maybe expanded a bit further was on the nuances of resistance and agency within the developing periphery itself, particularly the sociocultural aspect.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, it highlights figures like Jamsetji Tata in India or the Indian National Congress, focusing mostly on their eventual economic and political leverage against the Western system.
Okay.
It does mention things like violent uprisings in Vietnam or Algeria, but it doesn't really delve deeply into the internal social and political costs within those peripheral societies beyond the purely economic of being transformed by empires,
Right.
or the costs of asserting independence. How did the populations themselves, the ordinary people beyond the elites, actually experience all this?
That's a really crucial distinction. You're right. It eloquently details the how and the what of the power, shifts the economics, the migration, China's rise. Very well done. But it does sometimes leave you wanting more of the human story from that peripheral perspective, beyond just the economic and political leaders. It touches on horrific things like forced labor and the slave trade, for example, but they aren't the central focus when discussing the consequences of empire.
Right.
It acknowledges the shameful elements of the colonial past, but maybe doesn't fully explore the lived realities or the long-term systemic impacts on those populations in depth. It tends to prefer analyzing the grand economic and political shifts.
Yeah. And another related point, while it strongly, and I think correctly, argues that modern migration isn't an invasion like the Roman situation.
A very important point they make.
Crucial. But it could perhaps have explored the internal sociocultural adjustments required within Western societies a bit more explicitly.
You mean beyond the economics?
Exactly. It addresses the economic benefits of migration. It counters the far-right narratives very effectively. But those cultural cohesion concerns, even though the authors dismiss them as coming from disgruntled corners, they are a significant part of the political landscape today.
True.
The book touches on assortative mixing, people sticking with their own kind, economically or otherwise, and this increasing division between the better off and the working class, but maybe less on the actual cultural friction within host societies. Why do these cultural anxieties, even if based on false comparisons to Rome, resonate with some people beyond just pure economic self-interest? That feels like another potential gap in understanding, maybe.
This has been such a thought-provoking deep dive into why empires fall. Really fascinating stuff. Thank you for joining us.
And thank you all for being with us on this journey through, well, ancient and modern history. It's quite the ride.
I covered a lot today. From the economic realities of Rome's supposed golden age, right before its collapse, to the, frankly, incredible parallels with our own globalized world. I think one of the most interesting debates for us was definitely around that idea of inevitability versus choice in how empires unfold, especially when it comes to managing internal divisions and, crucially, fiscal policies. So, what did you think of the book's argument about the modern West's fiscal contract and rising debt? Do you buy the argument that it's truly a path to an existential crisis? We're clearly a bit divided on how much human choice really plays a role in maybe avoiding it.
Yeah, let us know your thoughts down in the comments section. We'd genuinely love to hear your take. Did you agree with the criticisms we raised? Or perhaps you noticed other omissions in the book's arguments, maybe about the human story from the periphery or those cultural impacts within host nations. Share your insights, please do. And don't forget to share this deep dive with anyone else who loves a good intellectual workout.